The chill of winter seeped through the stone walls of Wexmoor Estate, curling along the corridors like an uninvited spectre. Outside, frost clung stubbornly to the window-panes, glittering faintly in the pale light of a waning moon. Within, the estate's grand halls were alive with murmurs, the clinking of silver, and the soft rustle of silken gowns. Yet among the laughter and chatter, one figure moved with quiet restraint, unnoticed and yet at the center of all eyes. Eleanor, slender and poised, bore the composure of a woman far older than her 21 years. Her hair, a cascade of chestnut waves, framed a face at once delicate and resolute, with eyes that held the spark of curiosity and the shadow of unspoken sorrow. She moved carefully, balancing a tray of tea with hands both steady and trembling. Eleanor's life had been lived in a shadow, a careful dance along the edge of perception. To the world, she was the daughter of a maid, a charming but unremarkable presence in the estate. Only the Duke of Wexmoor, a man whose name carried weight and whose gaze could silence a room, knew her truth. She was, in secret, the daughter of Queen Eleanor, entrusted to the Duke's care after the Queen's untimely death. A secret kept not merely to shield her from harm but to preserve the fragile threads of royal legacy that others might seek to unravel. The Duke had sworn to protect her as a father would, yet the oath had become a cage, and the passage of years had drawn a subtle, dangerous tension between duty and something more complicated, more forbidden. Sebastian, Duke of Wexmoor, observed her from the shadowed end of the hallway, leaning casually against the carved oak doorway. He was a man of imposing stature, yet in that moment, the sharp lines of his face softened as his gaze lingered on her. There was a quiet torment in his eyes, an acknowledgment of the pull he had sought to deny. Every graceful movement she made, the tilt of her head, the measured step of her foot, the delicate lift of her hand, was a reminder of the oath he had sworn and the impossibility of suppressing a desire that had, for years, remained unspoken. The estate was abuzz that evening with visitors. Distant cousins of the Duke, a minor lord from London, and assorted gentry drawn to Wexmoor for the winter festivities. Eleanor moved among them, her presence barely noticed, a shadow flitting between the grand columns and velvet draperies. Yet whispers followed her like an unseen wind. "Surely the Duke's maid has taken a liking to our guest," murmured one lady, her eyes narrowing in thinly veiled suspicion. "A charming girl, but one would scarcely imagine her at court." The words were polite, but their sting struck deep. Eleanor's cheeks warmed, not at the observation itself, but at the subtle reminder that her truth, her heritage, remained cloaked, hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained pretense. The Duke moved closer, stepping into the light, though he did not announce himself. He watched, his posture a mixture of pride and restraint, as Eleanor poured tea for the visiting guests. Her hands were steady now, though earlier tremors had betrayed the anxiety of performing her allotted role. He admired her composure, the quiet dignity that had grown in her, almost unnoticed, like a flower that blooms in secret. He knew, as all who observed her did not, that her grace was not born of privilege alone. It was cultivated in the crucible of hidden sorrow, of early loss, and the disciplined tutelage that only a secret guardian could provide. A minor accident shattered the moment. A delicate porcelain cup slipped from Eleanor's fingers, the tea spilling across the silver tray with a harsh clatter. The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes widened in silent judgment. Eleanor's cheeks flamed crimson, and her lips pressed into a thin line as she bent quickly to retrieve the fallen vessel. Whispers erupted around her, polite on the surface yet venomous beneath. "Clumsy girl," said one voice, lightly, but with an edge sharpened by privilege. "Does she not know her station?" Another, more malicious, added, "Perhaps the Duke will reconsider her duties. The court requires refinement, not accidents." Sebastian's hand moved before his mind could fully register, brushing against the edge of her sleeve to steady her. It was a gesture small in its demonstration, yet monumental in its implication. Eleanor lifted her eyes to meet his, startled, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to the shared warmth of that fleeting contact. There was no scolding in his gaze, no reproach, only an intensity that spoke of concern, of quiet admiration, and a restraint that bordered on anguish. He saw the effort she made to mask her embarrassment, the swift correction of her posture, and the strength beneath the trembling exterior. Eleanor's pulse raced, her heart a wild rhythm that matched the tumult of the storm outside the estate. The murmurs continued, and yet the Duke's attention was a shield, a refuge in a room filled with judgment. She moved to set the tray down, her eyes inadvertently finding his once more. In that glance, a silent understanding passed between them. The world may see a maid, a girl of uncertain station, but he knew, as no one else could, the lineage she carried, the nobility of her spirit, and the beauty that transcended the trappings of circumstance. Despite the warmth of that moment, the Duke's mind was a tempest. He had vowed to protect her, to guide her, to keep her safe from the prying eyes of society, yet each passing year, each subtle movement, each glance shared in quiet corners, drew him deeper into a perilous longing. It was a longing that he chastised in the solitude of his chambers, a desire he could not voice, yet which shadowed every interaction. He was a man bound by honor and history, yet confronted daily with the impossible task of restraining the heart that now beat with renewed intensity at the sight of the young woman she had become. As the evening waned, the guests departed, leaving the estate in the quiet hum of firelight and the soft creak of settling stone. Eleanor retreated to the small parlor reserved for her. Smoothing her gown and reflecting on the delicate line, she walked between propriety and exposure. Every glance, every whisper, every minor mishap could shift the balance of perception, turning subtle admiration into pointed gossip. Yet in the solitude of the room, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace, imagining what it might be to live without concealment, without constant vigilance, without the weight of secrecy pressing upon her young shoulders. The Duke lingered outside her door, unseen yet present, a sentinel in the dim glow of candlelight. He watched her with a devotion both paternal and something far more intricate, a mixture of pride, fear, and longing that he had yet to define. He had sworn to shield her from the world, yet the world had found a way to intrude regardless. And in the quiet of that winter night, he realized with both dread and wonder that he no longer merely protected her. He was haunted by her presence, by the thought of her in his dreams, and by the unspoken truth that he might not be able to contain the depth of feeling growing within him. And so the evening ended, with frost clinging stubbornly to the windows, the firelight flickering across walls that had borne witness to generations of Wexmoor lineage, and two hearts, one bound by duty, the other unknowing of its own station, hovering on the precipice of revelation. Outside, the wind whispered through the bare branches of ancient oaks, carrying a promise of storms to come, both literal and of the heart. Inside, Eleanor and the Duke remained apart, yet irrevocably entwined by circumstance, secret, and the slow, inexorable pull of something neither could name. The world outside could not yet perceive the truth, but within the candlelit halls, destiny had begun to stir. The frost had not yet retreated from Wexmoor Estate when the first snow of January fell, blanketing the gardens in a crystalline hush. Eleanor, wrapped in a modest woolen shawl, walked along the path that led from the stables to the library, her boots leaving delicate imprints in the fresh powder. The estate, cloaked in winter's quiet grandeur, seemed to hold its breath, as though the very walls awaited the stirring of events yet to come. She carried with her a small bundle of letters, delivered from the neighboring village by a trusted footman, each envelope neatly sealed and stamped with care. As she entered the library, the Duke was already there, reclining in his high-backed chair before the fire. The room smelled of old parchment, polished oak, and the faint, comforting trace of pipe tobacco. Shelves lined with leather-bound volumes rose to the ceiling, their gold-embossed spines catching the firelight and casting a warm, golden glow over the Duke's austere features. He looked up at her arrival, his dark eyes shadowed with thought, and for a brief moment the austerity of his expression softened into something quieter, almost tender. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of authority, yet tempered with familiarity. "I trust the morning finds you well." She curtsied slightly, the motion automatic, though her eyes betrayed a flutter of unease. "Yes, your grace," she replied softly, setting the letters upon the polished surface of the table. "Though it seems the post has brought more than mere news from the village." He inclined his head, his gaze flickering over the envelope. "Indeed. There is always more in letters than the sender intends, is there not?" His remark, though casual, carried a subtle undercurrent, an acknowledgment that the world beyond Wexmoor pressed closer than either cared to admit. Eleanor hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of a small velvet package that had been placed atop the letters. It was delicate, tied with a ribbon of deep crimson, and bore no mark of sender or sender's intent. She lifted it with cautious curiosity, her pulse quickening as she untied the bow and opened it. Inside lay a single bloom, preserved in amber, accompanied by a note written in careful, looping script, "For your mind and heart alike, that you may know there are those who see your worth." The words struck her with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. She looked to the Duke, whose expression had darkened slightly, though he did not speak. He did not need to. The small gesture, meant for her, had brought whispers of scandal even in its quiet anonymity. In the eyes of the staff and the occasional visitor, a gift arriving unbidden could suggest attentions most inappropriate for one thought to be merely a servant. Yet the Duke's own thoughts were far more complicated. He noted the subtle way her lips curved in surprise, the soft catch of breath that betrayed her delight, and the way her eyes lifted to the shelves as if seeking guidance from a world she had not fully known she could inhabit. "Careful, Eleanor," he said, his tone steady, though it contained an unspoken plea. "The world is ever watchful, and gifts such as these, though innocent to some, may invite questions we are ill-prepared to answer." She met his gaze, sensing the depth beneath his caution, and nodded slowly. "I shall take care, your grace. Yet I cannot help but feel it is a kindness, meant without malice." The Duke's jaw tightened. Kindness or malice, the perception of others is all that matters in these halls. You must learn to navigate it, as I have guided you since infancy. There are eyes that see only rank and station, never the heart beneath the veil. She placed the flower carefully back into the box, lingering for a moment as if to capture the memory of it in her mind. "I shall endeavor, as always," she said, her voice gentle yet resolute. Winter days at Wexmoor were long and measured, punctuated by the rituals of study, domestic duties, and occasional visits from neighboring nobility. Yet even within these routines, small moments of intimacy and tension unfurled between the Duke and Eleanor. He continued to instruct her, literature, history, music, and the arts of conversation deemed appropriate for the women of higher station, yet every lesson was tinged with something unspoken. A hand resting lightly on her shoulder as he guided her posture, a quiet correction of pronunciation spoken close enough to brush against her cheek, each touch charged with restraint and unsaid longing. The arrival of a letter from London one evening shifted the delicate balance of their lives. Delivered by a courier whose cloak bore the mark of a minor court official, the letter was addressed to the Duke, though its contents pertained to her. It spoke of curious inquiries in the capital, mentions of a young woman of unrecognized noble blood who had been seen in proximity to Wexmoor. The Duke's brow darkened as he read, the firelight reflecting the storm gathering in his mind. He folded the letter carefully, setting it aside. "The world stirs with questions," he murmured, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "And it will not rest until answers are found. We must be vigilant." Eleanor, sensing the weight in his tone, pressed her lips together. "I am yours to guide, as always, your grace. Whatever the world may whisper, I will follow your counsel." He inclined his head, the faintest flicker of admiration softening the stern lines of his face. Yet beneath it lingered fear, not for himself but for her. Every whispered word, Every gesture of attention she received from outside the estate had the potential to unravel the delicate secrecy that preserved her life. And yet, even in that fear, a deeper emotion stirred, one that he struggled daily to contain. The growing realization that the girl he had vowed to protect was no longer a child in his eyes, but a woman whose presence occupied his thoughts, haunting and unrelenting, in ways both thrilling and dangerous. Days passed, each marked by study and small lessons in propriety, yet each also punctuated by the subtle provocations of fate. A guest's compliment, a minor slight from the servants, the unexpected delivery of a rare book or trinket, all of these rippled through the quiet waters of Wexmoor life, testing Eleanor's composure and the Duke's patience. He found himself watching her in moments of solitude, the tilt of her head as she read, the concentration in her gaze, the soft sigh of satisfaction when she mastered a passage or skill. Every small success of hers, every expression of independent thought, was a reminder of the truth he had sworn to guard, a truth that made his heart ache and pulse with dangerous, unbidden emotion. On a particularly cold evening, a masquerade ball was held in honor of distant relations from London. The halls glittered with candlelight, chandeliers catching the flame in prismatic bursts. Eleanor, hidden in plain view, moved among the guests, her modest gown contrasting with the extravagant finery of the visitors. Yet her presence, though understated, drew attention. Eyes lingered on her, whispers followed her passage, and even in the crowd, she felt the subtle weight of scrutiny. The Duke, ever vigilant, maintained a shadowed distance, his expression a mask of propriety while his thoughts raged with possessiveness and fear. As the evening concluded, Eleanor returned to the quiet of the library, her cheeks flushed with the cold and the thrill of unseen glances. The Duke closed the door behind her, a hand lingering on the wood for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "You have done well," he said softly, his voice carrying both commendation and something more, something intimate, unspoken, yet impossible to ignore. She met his gaze, understanding the layered meaning in his word. "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady though her heart betrayed the tumult within. "I could not have managed without your guidance." The Duke inclined his head, silently acknowledging both her words and the truth they masked. Outside, the first snow of the evening had begun to fall again, a soft curtain of white settling over the grounds. Within the walls of Wexmoor, two hearts moved ever closer, bound by duty, secrecy, and a growing, perilous affection that neither dared to name. The storm had arrived in full force by nightfall, rattling the shutters and lashing the estate's windows with icy rain. Within Wexmoor, the fire roared in the hearth of the library, casting flickering shadows across walls lined with books that smelled of parchment and time. Eleanor sat near the fire, a letter clutched tightly in her hands, its edges softened by frequent unfolding. It had arrived that afternoon, carried by a courier whose anxious demeanor suggested the importance of its contents. The script was precise, elegant, and formal, speaking of matters beyond her immediate understanding yet hinting at intrigue in London, rumors of a young woman of unacknowledged noble lineage, whose presence was stirring both curiosity and suspicion among the court. She pressed the letter to her chest, her breath shallow as the storm outside mirrored the turmoil in her heart. Her life had been one of careful concealment, each day measured, each gesture rehearsed to avoid suspicion. Yet even in her secrecy, the world seemed to encroach, whispering truths she had yet to know. A soft creak drew her attention. Sebastian had entered the library without announcement, as he often did when his thoughts weighed heavily upon him. His dark coat was damp from the rain, his boots leaving faint traces on the polished floor. He closed the door behind him, the lock clicking in a sound both final and intimate. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, carrying the gravity of a man who had spent decades balancing duty with desire. "May I sit?" She nodded, scarcely able to form words, and he lowered himself into the armchair opposite her. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the wind's lament outside and the occasional pop of the fire. His gaze did not waver, fixed upon her with a mixture of concern, admiration, and an emotion she had long suspected but never named. "Do you understand the gravity of this?" he asked at last, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The world is beginning to notice anomalies, threads that, if pulled, may unravel all that we have carefully maintained." Eleanor swallowed, the warmth of the fire doing little to ease the chill in her chest. "I understand, Your Grace," she said softly, "but I cannot know fully what it is you fear. The letter speaks in riddles, hinting at truths I cannot yet grasp." Sebastian's eyes darkened, and he leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I fear, Eleanor, for you. Not for myself, not for the estate, but for your safety, your dignity. Every gift, every compliment, every glance that may seem harmless to you is a potential weapon in the eyes of those who wish to control or destroy." She shifted, drawing her shawl closer. "I have been careful," she murmured, though her tone betrayed both apprehension and longing. "I do not wish to draw attention, yet the world seems determined to find me, whether I am worthy or not." Sebastian's gaze softened, but the shadow of his internal struggle remained. "It is not merely attention, Eleanor," he said quietly. "It is the perception of propriety, of rank, of station. I have sworn to protect you, to guide you through these waters, and yet—" His voice faltered, a rare breach in the composure he cultivated with meticulous care. Eleanor's heart caught. "And yet?" she prompted gently, sensing the weight of unspoken truths between them. "And yet," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I find myself undone by your presence, by the woman you have become. I have watched you grow from a child into this light, this grace, this intelligence that commands attention even when none should notice. I swore to be a father, a guardian, yet I am no longer certain I can contain the feelings that stir within me." The words struck her with the force of revelation, sending a tremor through her chest. She had sensed, in quiet glances and fleeting touches, that the Duke's regard went deeper than mere guardianship, yet to hear it spoken aloud, so deliberate, so measured, was both terrifying and intoxicating. Her own pulse quickened, a mixture of fear, desire, and recognition of truths she had not permitted herself to acknowledge. "Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling, "you speak of a bond one have always cherished, yet I fear what it implies. To feel such closeness, such attention, is to risk ruin in a world that watches so closely. I do not know if I am worthy of such devotion." Sebastian rose, moving to stand beside her, his hand hovering near hers yet stopping short of contact. "Worthy?" he echoed, a trace of incredulity in his tone. "You do not understand, Eleanor. Worth is not given by society or circumstance. It is inherent, and in that regard you are beyond measure. But there is danger in these confessions, peril in the acknowledgement of what both our hearts desire yet must restrain." She turned to face him fully, the firelight illuminating the subtle flush of her cheeks. "And yet you confess," she whispered, as though the admission itself were a test. "You risk propriety, scandal, perhaps even your own reputation, to speak this truth." Sebastian exhaled, a slow, measured release of tension he had carried for years. "I confess not recklessly," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "I confess because to remain silent would be a cruelty, to both you and myself. I have lived decades in service, in duty, and in the careful suppression of longing. Yet every day, every glance, every word exchanged with you has rendered that suppression impossible. I watch you, and I am haunted by the realization that I am drawn to you in ways I cannot deny, and that may imperil us both." Eleanor's hand lifted almost instinctively, brushing against the sleeve of his coat, though neither withdrew. "Then what are we to do, Your Grace?" she asked softly, the tremor in her voice betraying both fear and the stirrings of something far deeper. "How do we navigate the world that would condemn even the thought of such feelings?" He bent slightly, lowering his voice to a murmur that seemed to fill the room with intimacy. "We endure, we wait, we protect. We acknowledge what cannot yet be acted upon, and we guard it as fiercely as we have guarded your life. And yet," he hesitated, and the pause was heavy with meaning, "I cannot pretend that these feelings will remain confined. You have become, unknowingly, the axis upon which my world turns. To see you happy, to see you safe, to see you recognized for the person you truly are, these are the desires that now define me." Eleanor's eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "And if the world discovers this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm's lament. "If propriety and expectation seek to separate us?" Sebastian's hand hovered again, finally resting lightly upon hers, a touch both protective and electrifying. "Then we face it as we have faced every obstacle to your safety. Together, though not yet in the manner my heart longs for. You must trust me, as I have trusted you to understand the weight of what has been hidden and the danger that surrounds us." The firelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows that danced like specters of the life yet to come. Outside, the wind screamed through the ancient oaks, but inside the library, a different storm raged, one of unspoken longing, careful restraint, and confessions that could not be retracted. Eleanor squeezed his hand lightly, a silent acknowledgment of understanding, of complicity, of a bond that had shifted irrevocably from guardian and ward to something far more intimate and perilous. And so the night wore on, with thunder rolling in the distance and rain pelting the windows, yet within the library, a fragile peace settled. The Duke remained close, a sentinel in both body and heart, and Eleanor, for the first time, allowed herself to feel the dangerous thrill of recognition, that she was no longer merely a girl under protection, but a woman who had stirred in him desires neither could yet name aloud. Outside, the storm would continue to rage, but inside, two hearts had confessed truths long held in shadow, setting in motion a chain of events that neither time nor propriety could contain. The first light of dawn spilled through the tall windows of Wexmoor Estate, glinting across polished floors and casting the library in a pale, trembling glow. Outside, winter's chill had softened to a gentle frost, and the gardens shimmered with a quiet beauty, as if nature itself had conspired to offer a reprieve after nights of storm and shadow. Eleanor stood near the hearth, the fire now reduced to smoldering embers, her fingers tracing the delicate pattern of the rug beneath her. The events of recent weeks had altered the rhythm of her life. Letters from London hinting at inquiries, subtle glances from guests whose curiosity was no longer easily concealed, and the ever-watchful presence of Sebastian, whose silent devotion both comforted and unnerved her. The Duke entered without ceremony, his coat brushing the floor lightly, the rain from the morning thaw still clinging to its folds. He paused at the threshold, surveying the room with eyes that were both commanding and vulnerable, as though the weight of duty and the pull of desire waged an eternal duel within him. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady, "we have little time before the arrival of our guests. The court inquires, and Wexmoor must answer, lest rumor and speculation overtake reason." She nodded, folding a letter she had been reading, the words inside still fresh in her mind. "I understand, Your Grace. And yet, I feel unprepared, though I trust your guidance implicitly." Sebastian moved closer, closing the distance between them by a step, a motion deliberate yet charged with unspoken meaning. "It is not merely guidance you require, nor preparation for the eyes of strangers. It is the recognition of truth, Eleanor, the acknowledgement of who you are and the place you hold in the world. Not as a maid, not as an observer of propriety, but as the woman whose very existence commands attention, respect, and admiration." Her gaze lifted, startled, meeting the intensity in his eyes. The firelight reflected there, casting shadows that danced across his stern features, softening them with a vulnerability he rarely permitted himself. For a moment neither spoke, the air between them thick with anticipation, the unspoken acknowledgement of the tension that had long simmered beneath the surface. The first knock at the door broke the spell, and a footman entered to announce the arrival of the royal emissary from London. The Duke inclined his head, signaling Eleanor to remain composed, though he remained close enough that the faintest touch of his hand on her back reassured her without words. The emissary, a formal man of considerable bearing, stepped into the room, bowing slightly before addressing Sebastian. "Your Grace, the Crown has requested your presence and the young lady who accompanies you. Matters of lineage and recognition require immediate discussion." Eleanor's heart stilled for a moment, the weight of destiny pressing upon her like the frost upon the garden glass. She had long suspected her origin, yet the confirmation, now unavoidable, carried both exhilaration and terror. Sebastian's hand lingered near hers, a grounding presence, though he offered no comfort in words. Instead, his gaze met hers, conveying silently that he would remain by her side, regardless of the revelations to come. They traveled together through the snow-dusted grounds to the awaiting carriage, the chill air biting at Eleanor's cheeks, leaving a delicate flush that made her appear at once fragile and vibrant. The emissary's stern gaze followed her as she entered the carriage, and Sebastian seated himself beside her, the warmth of his presence a quiet shield against both the cold and the scrutiny of the world. The journey to London was silent save for the rhythmic clatter of horses' hooves on the frost-hardened road, each moment amplifying the anticipation that wound tightly around them both. Upon arrival, the court was a spectacle of splendor, gilded halls, glittering chandeliers, and the subtle fragrance of flowers arranged to impress. The courtiers murmured amongst themselves as the young woman, previously thought a mere companion, was presented before the royal council. Whispers flitted like shadows. Who is she? How has she come to be here? Yet Sebastian's hand rested lightly on her elbow, a firm yet protective gesture, ensuring she maintained her composure while silently asserting the truth of her place beside him. The emissary addressed the assembly, detailing the lineage of the young woman, confirming her identity as the daughter of the late Queen Eleanor. Gasps of shock and admiration echoed through the chamber. Some eyes widened with envy, others with respect, yet all acknowledged the sudden shift in perception. Eleanor's composure wavered only slightly, though her posture remained impeccable, a reflection of the lessons she had received under Sebastian's careful tutelage. Once the council had been dismissed, the Duke led her to a quiet gallery, its windows framing the frost-laden gardens beyond. The bustle of the court faded behind them, leaving a sanctuary of firelight and muted color. He turned to her, his expression both resolute and vulnerable. "Eleanor," he began, voice low, deliberate, "you have been revealed to the world, and yet this revelation alters nothing of what I have long known. You are as radiant, as capable, as deserving of admiration as the crown itself declares. And yet—" She met his gaze, her pulse quickening, aware that the "yet" carried weight heavier than any judgment she had encountered. "Yet?" she prompted softly, her voice almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire. Sebastian stepped closer, closing the space between them, his hand brushing lightly against hers once more. "Yet my heart," he admitted, "has been compelled to recognize the depth of its own desires. I swore to protect you, to shield you from scandal, to preserve your life in secret. And I have kept that oath. But I can no longer deny that my devotion has shifted into something far more profound, far more inescapable. You are not merely my ward, Eleanor. You have become the center of my world, the pulse that drives my thoughts, the presence I cannot forsake." Her breath caught, a mixture of fear and longing coiling within her. "Sebastian," she whispered, "if propriety, if expectation, if the judgment of society seeks to divide us, what shall we do? How can I answer a heart such as yours without fear?" He took her hand fully in his, their fingers entwining in a gesture both intimate and declarative. "Then we answer as we always have, together. We acknowledge the truth, even in the face of scrutiny. We allow the world to see that which cannot be hidden, and we claim what is ours by right, by destiny, and by the depth of the bond we share." Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears, though she lifted her chin with a quiet dignity. "Then I shall trust you, Sebastian," she said, her voice steady, "as I have always trusted you. And if the world would see us condemned, let them. I would rather stand with you than live in concealment, in fear, or in shadow. The Duke drew her close, a subtle, measured embrace that spoke of protection, pride, and the first acknowledgment of mutual desire that could now be named aloud. Then we shall face the world together, he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple, a silent promise that words could scarcely encompass. Outside the gallery, courtiers whispered and observers speculated, yet within the firelit sanctuary of Wexmoor's legacy, two hearts had found their equilibrium. Duty and love, honor and longing, secrecy and revelation, all had converged in a moment that was at once fragile and irrevocable. The Duke and Eleanor, bound by circumstance and now by conscious choice, understood that the path forward would require courage, patience, and the unwavering acknowledgment of the truth that had long been concealed. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting a soft glow across the frost-kissed gardens visible through the gallery windows, they stood together, hand in hand, prepared to meet the world with the knowledge that whatever whispers, scrutiny, or envy awaited, they had claimed a sanctuary of shared hearts, mutual devotion, and irrevocable trust. The revelation of her lineage had shifted the course of their lives, but it had not diminished the bond that had formed in shadows, firelight, and unspoken longing. In that quiet, luminous moment, Wexmoor was no longer merely a house of stone and timber. It was a testament to endurance, fidelity, and the promise of a love that could withstand scrutiny, scandal, and the unyielding demands of society. The morning of the ceremony dawned with a pale, ethereal light filtering through the frost-laden windows of Wexmoor Estate. The gardens shimmered under a delicate glaze of ice, each branch and blossom encased in crystal, and the world outside seemed hushed, as if holding its breath for the union about to be witnessed within the walls of the ancestral home. Eleanor stood in the sunlight of the great hall, her gown a quiet cascade of ivory silk, trimmed with delicate lace that caught the light with each subtle movement. Her hair, arranged with meticulous care, framed her face in soft waves, and her eyes, luminous and resolute, betrayed the mingling of excitement and trepidation that gripped her heart. Sebastian entered shortly after, the weight of his coat brushed smooth over his shoulders, yet his posture carried the mixture of authority and vulnerability that only those closest to him had ever perceived. He paused at the threshold, surveying her with a gaze that encompassed years of unspoken longing, duty, and devotion. For a heartbeat, the grandeur of the hall, the gilded walls, the towering chandeliers, the murmuring assembly of courtiers and dignitaries, faded into a blur, leaving only the woman he had sworn to protect, now standing in quiet radiance before him. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice resonant even in the vast hall, "today is not merely a testament to station or lineage. It is a testament to endurance, to patience, to the quiet fortitude that has guided you through shadows and uncertainty." She lifted her gaze to meet his, her pulse quickening. "And it is a testament to you, Sebastian," she replied, her voice steady, though the slightest tremor betrayed the emotion beneath. "For it is by your guidance, your protection, and your unwavering faith in me that I stand here, no longer concealed, no longer hidden." A hush fell over the gathered assembly as the officiant began the formalities, his voice solemn, echoing faintly against the marble floors and gilded walls. Courtiers whispered among themselves, astonishment and admiration mingling in their tones, for the young woman they had once believed a maid was now recognized as a daughter of the late Queen Eleanor, and the Duke's choice to bind himself to her in marriage was both audacious and inevitable. Sebastian extended his hand, the gesture deliberate, a silent invitation for her to step forward and claim the place beside him. She took it, the warmth of his touch sending a subtle shiver through her, a mixture of exhilaration and reassurance. Each step they took together was a declaration, a defiance of rumor and expectation, and a fulfillment of the bond forged over years of shared confidences, whispered guidance, and stolen glances. "By your own free will," the officiant intoned, "do you take this person to be your partner, your confidant, your equal in all matters of life and heart?" "I do," Eleanor replied, her voice clear and unwavering, the culmination of years spent navigating secrecy, expectation, and the unspoken understanding between them. "And you," the officiant continued, turning to Sebastian, "do you take this person to be your partner, your confidant, your equal, recognizing the bond that has long existed in shadow and now emerges in light?" "I do," he answered, his gaze never leaving hers, the words carrying the weight of duty fulfilled and desire confessed. The hall seemed to exhale collectively, the tension of years, whispers, and speculation dissolving in the acknowledgement of truth and devotion. The exchange of rings followed, simple bands of gold, yet imbued with significance beyond material value. Sebastian slid the ring onto Eleanor's finger with care, his hand steady, though his chest rose and fell with a rhythm betraying the depth of emotion he felt. She reciprocated, and the contact, though formal, was electric, a subtle declaration that the bond between them was now recognized by both heart and world. As the ceremony concluded, the Duke drew her close, a protective yet intimate gesture, and whispered, "You have been my duty, my secret, my anchor, and now you are my heart." Eleanor rested her head lightly against his shoulder, feeling the solidity of his presence and the unspoken promises contained in the warmth of his embrace. "And you have been my guide, my shelter, my constant," she murmured. "Together we shall face whatever the world may demand." The assembly erupted into polite applause, tempered by the awe of witnessing a union that transcended mere propriety. Courtiers and dignitaries, once skeptical, now regarded them with quiet respect, for the strength of character, courage, and devotion displayed could not be denied. Even those inclined toward envy or judgment found themselves captivated by the authenticity of the bond between the Duke and the woman whose lineage had been obscured, yet whose presence could no longer be ignored. The newly joined couple moved to the balcony overlooking the gardens, where the frost still clung to branches and the morning light painted the estate in hues of silver and gold. The world stretched vast before them, yet in that moment, the expanse of snow and sky seemed less intimidating than the intimate closeness they shared. Sebastian took her hand, intertwining fingers with a tenderness born of long anticipation. "Do you feel it, Eleanor?" he asked softly. "The world watches, yes, but here, in this space, it cannot touch what we have claimed. We have endured storms, whispers, and shadows, yet we remain. Together." She smiled, the warmth of the gesture illuminating her features. "I feel it, Sebastian. And I know that no matter what may come, this moment is ours, and it will remain in memory and heart alike. We have claimed more than titles or recognition, we have claimed each other." They lingered there, the frost glinting in the soft light, the silence around them both sacred and charged with the culmination of years spent in quiet devotion. Outside, the distant chiming of bells heralded the day, yet inside the intimate space of balcony and breath, time seemed to pause, honoring the bond that had weathered secrecy, longing, and the relentless scrutiny of society. Later, as the festivities continued within the hall, Sebastian guided Eleanor through the rooms, introducing her to those who would now recognize her rightful place. Every bow, every courteous acknowledgement, every whispered congratulations served as affirmation that the world, while slow to adjust, could witness the union of hearts as well as stations. Yet even amidst the grandeur, the whispered gossip, and the glittering display of wealth and influence, their attention remained fixed on one another, each gesture, glance, and whispered word affirming a shared understanding that neither eyes nor ears could intrude upon. As twilight descended, casting long shadows across the estate and gardens now dusted with evening frost, Sebastian and Eleanor returned to the private chambers that had sheltered them through years of secrecy. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final click, sealing away the scrutiny and expectation of the world beyond. They stood together by the fire, its glow illuminating faces radiant with relief, love, and triumph. "You are mine, wholly and without reservation," Sebastian murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "And I am yours, in all ways permitted and all ways imagined." Eleanor lifted her gaze, the tears she had restrained through ceremony now glistening. "And so we shall be," she replied, her voice steady, resolute, and filled with the quiet power of someone who has endured, survived, and now claimed the life she was always meant to live. Outside, the night embraced Wexmoor Estate in its quiet grandeur. Inside, two hearts had completed the arc that began in secrecy and shadow, survived the tempests of society and expectation, and now beat in unison, bound by love, trust, and the irrevocable recognition of one another's worth. In the stillness of that winter night, the Duke and his princess stood together, the promise of a shared future etched into the very stones and walls that had sheltered them. The world beyond could whisper, judge, or envy, yet within Wexmoor, the past had been reconciled, the present secured, and the future claimed, not through titles, not through wealth, but through the undeniable, enduring force of love. And in that quiet, luminescent moment, the estate itself seemed to exhale, acknowledging that all trials had led to this truth. Two hearts, once divided by secrecy and circumstance, now bound irrevocably, would face the world together, unshakable, unafraid, and wholly, gloriously united.